you. Senator Udall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate you holding this hearing and doing it, you and Senator Cardin, in such a balanced way. Just very much appreciate that. And I'm honored, Senator Flake, to be on your Freedom to Travel bill. I think one of the things that is so important is opening Cuba up to travel, and there couldn't be better ambassadors than our citizens going down to Cuba and visiting about what we're all about in terms of democracy and human rights and those kinds of very, very important values. And I, at the beginning, just want to say I very much support this policy of normalization. I think we're turning the page on a failed policy that's been going on since the early 1960s. We're moving to empowering the Cuban people, empowering Cuban entrepreneurs, and I really welcome this new chapter of normalized relations. It was mentioned earlier about, and you were asked several questions, really appreciate you both being here and all your hard work over the years in this area, about the private sector. And I have looked for reports on what's happening down there, and I think it's fascinating in terms of the growth, the dramatic growth in the private sector. A 2013 Brookings report, now there are probably more because that's an old report, is looking at close to 1 million classified as private sector. You have 500,000 legally registered as self-employed, and then you have another 570,000 farmers who own or lease private plots working solo or in cooperatives. And as I think is mentioned in your testimony, there's an organic sector that's also working there, organic farming and organic marketing. In addition to that, there's another estimated from this report, 600,000 to 1 million, who are labeled private sector, but they are considered illegal by the Cuban government. And so there's also a sector there that's growing. So you have these two large sectors which could be in the range of 2 million. And I think that's what, when we travel down there, when we engage down there, when our commerce these are the folks that we're helping. These are the folks that we're helping grow. These are the folks that we're empowering, and I think that's a very, very good thing. Now, this one of the areas that I think is critically important and is increasing our agriculture interaction with Cuba. And so I'm also proud to be on in addition to Senator Flake, Senator Heitkamp has a bill to permit increased agricultural sales. I'm on that. And this week I'm introducing the Cuba Digital and Communications Advancement Act, also known as the Cuba Data Act, with Senator Flake, Senator Durbin, and Senator Enzi. The goal of this legislation is very simple. Give U.S. telecommunications companies the opening and certainty they need to invest and help Cuba open to the world, and give the Cubans the tools they need to engage in a 21st century economy, and to share information and communicate more efficiently with each other and with the world. So, Secretary Jacobson, both you and the President have emphasized that access to the Internet is one of the cornerstones to the new Cuba policy. For those who have not been to Cuba, it's one of the least wired countries in the Western Hemisphere. Things we take for granted, such as email on the phone, are basically non-existent in Cuba. What are the major challenges Cubans are facing to access the Internet, and what can U.S. companies and the Congress do to open up Cuba to the global Internet?
Thank you so much, Senator, and thanks you so much for your interest in this and the conversations that we've had. I think that obviously a huge part of the obstacles to the Cuban people right now are sheer access to Internet connected devices, whether it's computers or whether it's smartphones. When they have access, that access is expensive. It's almost prohibitive. Even when the cost came down recently for the public access to Internet, it was still extremely expensive. For most Cubans, it was about a half a month's wage. And so what we're talking about, and then there is a question of whether everything is accessible once you get on the web, and whether there are things that are blocked. So there are huge challenges for the average Cuban. I think that there is a combination of reasons for that, but the Cuban government fundamentally has to make decisions, and we obviously want to encourage in every way possible that information and access to the internet be made easier, cheaper, available and open for the Cuban people. That will take a variety of decisions by the government that we're encouraging them to take by encouraging American businesses to have those conversations with them, and these are the means to do so.
The goal, as I think you said in your testimony, Madam Secretary, of the Cuban government is to have internet access for 50% of its population by 2020. So they have stated this goal. They said, we're trying to move there. This is the goal the UN has also made for developing countries around the world. Is this goal achievable by Cuba? And if the United States telecom companies were allowed to invest in Cuba, how long would it take to completely wire the island?
That's a great question, Senator, and I'm not the best of tech experts, but I will tell you that the tech companies that I speak to who had conversations either with Cuba or about Cuba believe it is absolutely possible. And in terms of how long it would take, a lot depends on what the Cubans decide to do and what kind of infrastructure they put in.
Yeah, thank you very much for those answers. And just, Mr. Chairman, just a final comment. I know that all of the things that have been mentioned here that are problems, that we don't agree with, problems and challenges in Cuba, and we just have different goals to try to get those things changed. And as a last note, I'd like to express my support for the extradition of Charlie Hill. Extradition of criminals, I think, is an important part of any normal relations between countries. Charlie Hill, who allegedly murdered a New Mexico State police officer and hijacked a plane, must be brought to justice. And I know the State Department shares this objective, and I hope we can continue to make this a priority until we get it done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.